So welcome to Jemma Gunning, who will be sharing her printmaking practice with us today. Gemma's practice researches into industrial decline, exploring spaces that have been abandoned and left to fall into disrepair. She has an urge to record our heritage before it's obliterated from our landscapes and our past culture becomes lost. In 2018, she was awarded a Queen Elizabeth Scholarship to support the development of her technical understanding of intaglio processes. Working closely with master printmakers at the City and Guilds of London Art School, she's refined her working methodologies. Alongside her practice, Jemma works as a technical instructor in the lithography studio at UWE and runs her own print studio in South Bristol, which I think we'll hear a bit more about in the talk. Jemma is a member of the Royal Society of Painter Printmakers, Heritage Craft Association and People of Print. She exhibits regularly in the UK and internationally. And I will hand over to you now, Jemma.
Thank you for that lovely intro. Okay, this is going to be quite a visual presentation. So I've got a PowerPoint that I'm going to share with you. Sorry, let me just make this work. Oh. Hello?
Hello.
Oh, sorry. It just went blank then. Right, I'm gonna, hopefully this will work.
Yes.
Yes, that's brilliant. So we were having technical difficulties every day, but not today. Okay, from the start. Okay, can you all see that? It's all fine.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just give you a bit of background information about kind of where I studied, kind of my route into printmaking. And drawing has always been a big influence in my work. I'm going to say the cliche thing is that I've been drawing since I was a child. Always had like a sketchbook and a pencil kind of glued to me. And that kind of remained when I went to Art Foundation. I did a BA in drawing 10 years ago. And when I was on my BA, I was making a lot of monoprints and a lot of colograph printing. And that kind of was sparked from seeing John Virtue's Monotypes at this, where was it? Somerset House. And I don't know if you know his work, but John Virtue is a London-based printmaker. And he makes these huge, he's mainly known for his paintings, but he has done a series of monotypes, and they're quite big and they're semi-representational of the London city skyline. And I saw these coming out of the toilet of Somerset House, so it was complete chance. And at the time I had no idea what a monoprint was. And I went back to the technician at uni and asked, what is a monoprint? So she showed me, and I just basically spent 3 years in the studio making prints, as you can see here, quite abstract, really kind of focusing on the shapes and textures found within the urban landscape. I was making quite a lot of photograms, so drawing positives and exposing them in the darkroom, which I then abstracted and took further into the printed form. For some reason. Okay. At the time, I was also influenced by Anselm Kiefer, who is a German expressionist painter. And what I loved about his work was he used a lot of natural forms within his paintings, which meant they were always in a state of flux. They were never fixed in a position. So he was using lead, he was using sunflowers, coffee, all things that would alter over many years. And from that, I think that's my love of texture came from looking at his work. And so I started drawing quite big scale, using lots of coffee, mud, ink, kind of being quite expressive, very different to my work that you see now. And that led me to making more colograph plates. So that's kind of, oh, I've gone too far now, sorry. As you can see, I'm not very good at PowerPoint. So my love of textures and mark making came from my degree. And like I said, I was focusing on the urban landscape, looking at the impact humans have on those environments and the traces that we leave behind. So my work became quite abstract, and I left my BA and I did a internship in London Print Studio, and it was there I realized that people were printmaking for a living, which sounded pretty cool. So I signed up and I started a master's in multidisciplinary printmaking at UE. So I moved from Wiltshire to Bristol, a whole new city, a new place to explore. And it's here really that I really became kind of focused and quite passionate about the printed mark, realizing that there's so many different disciplines that offered very many ways of producing images. So a new place, I started doing a series of monotypes just to get to know the city. Again, quite abstract, semi-representational, using kind of all different types of tools to kind of create expressive marks. And this is where my love of historic buildings came into play. So before living in a city, I was living in a town, and it was a treat to go to the city, to see the big buildings and to experience their kind of hustle and bustle. And as I was walking around the city in Bristol, when I first moved here, I came across this really bizarre structure on the harbour. And I become a bit obsessed with it. And I would go there at the weekends and I would draw this building, wondering what its previous life was. All these narratives started coming to my mind. So to find out its history, I did a short residency at the Bristol Record Office. And I delved into their archives, and I spent 6 months researching kind of the historic building, but also other buildings within the city. And what my research noted was that this used to be an old gatehouse to the prison, which was built in something like the 17th, 18th century. And this gatehouse also doubled up as an execution platform. So where I had stood for weeks and weeks just drawing happily, actually hundreds of people were hung above where I stood, which kind of gave me the chills. So from this and my drawings, I started to respond using etching. And then this is where my love for copperplate etching came into play. There was something so beautiful about rolling on a hard ground onto a shiny piece of copper, smoking the plate, and then revealing the metal underneath with a needle. And for those of you who aren't familiar with etching, it's a form of intaglio printmaking, which means you are creating incised lines beneath the surface of the plate so that will then hold the ink when you come to pull it through a press. So realizing that all the potential etching has, I started just to explore this process further. And I started kind of documenting the change this building was going through. So when I first come to find this place, there was no scaffolding. It was in a pretty shoddy way. People were using it to, sleep in and, graffiti, and which is interesting because it becomes a playground for all different types of people. And it's almost, a museum of the city. And then it started going through change. So I don't know if many of you know Bristol, but this now has no scaffolding. It's been cleaned up, and that kind of ruin lust has been almost taken away from it. So before there was ivy climbing up, the walls of the bricks, and now it's kind of polished, which for me hasn't got quite the same desire. At the time of my MA, I was really influenced by Piranesi's work. And for those of you who don't know him, he's an 18th century artist. He actually trained as an architect, but failed and turned his hand to printmaking. And he would make these etchings that documented the ancient ruins of Rome because he could not foresee a future for these structures. And he would sell them to people coming to Rome as, memoirs to take home with them. And he has got there's hundreds and hundreds of these prints of buildings which no longer exist. And I suppose I saw myself as a modern day version of Piranesi, documenting these, historic buildings along the harbour in Bristol. At the same time, I was also looking at my contemporaries. So I'm influenced by Ian Chamberlain's work, who is also a bricks artist, and really enjoyed the way that he used intaglio printmaking to form these amazing structures that had a lot of light and darkness to them. It really pulled you in. And I was also looking at Michael Gurry, who is the artist on the left here. He's based in Chicago, and the way that he uses intaglio printmaking is really extraordinary, because he, before even starting on a piece of copper, he will run the plate over, he will throw like hammers, he'll really kind of rough up the surface of the copper so that he's almost working with the marks already on the plate. And again, there's this real sense of light and depth to his work, because there's normally a reflection somewhere within his work, whether it's in a mirror, whether it's in a puddle, whether, I don't know, they're just really incredible. And his linear work as well, that just pulls you in. He uses all kinds of tools. So whilst I'd finished making the kind of a body of work on the jail, I started searching out more buildings in Bristol, and this one in particular caught my eye, and it's the old chocolate factory in Easton. So for those of you who don't know Bristol, or do know Bristol, it's just off the cycle path, and in its heyday would have employed like 1,500 men or women to make chocolates. It was previous to Elizabeth Shaw, it was Packers. And it was on this site for about 60 years before they've now moved down to the Portway. But inside this building, there's these kind of snippets of history that are remained. And for me, this is what kind of sparks narratives in the buildings. And it's visually exciting to go into a space which not many people get a chance to explore. So again, it's this kind of documentary printmaking that I've kind of started to do over the last 4 years, because this building now has been it's going to be turned into flats, and one part of the building has already been knocked down. So it's a record of that moment in time. I was also interested in this church that I found in Kingswood. It's called Whitfield Tabernacle. Again, it still exists, but year on year, it's just failing. It's just falling further into decline. And there's something about a feud in this family, which is really, really sad, because it's this beautiful sacred place, which now just is just left to rot and fall further into disrepair. So at the time, I decided to start working large scale because it suited what I was documenting. These buildings that I've been going into, they have this real monumental feel to them, especially the church and the chocolate factory. The chocolate factory is built by the Victorians, so it's grand. It's got these huge windows that fill the room with optimonite. And I started making these kind of big etchings. And the reason why I started using etching was because the process lends itself to what I'm recording. So within the etched mark, I can use certain techniques that replicate the crumbling of brickwork and the kind of weatheredness of the stone and the masonry. This is a really bad image. You can't really make this out. Apologies for that. But this is a triptych of a stone lithograph. So alongside etching, I also practicing stone lithography. One of the most beautiful printmaking processes you'll ever come to find. It's the most relatable to the hand-drawn mark. You can get the most gorgeous kind of pencil marks and tones, and you can scrape back into the stone. So for me, it's on up there with etching, but I use it for very different, I kind of use both processes to suit the building that I'm going to be documenting. So whilst on my MA, I was also working as a member technician at Spike Print Studio. And here I was asked to technician for Jason Hicklin, and I jumped at the chance because I absolutely love his work, and he's one of the printmaking tutors at the City and Guilds of London Art School. And I've been following his work for a few years and really admired the way that he makes his plates. So this is just an example of Jason's work. He uses zinc plates, and a lot of it is, he uses a lot of sugar lift, a lot of spit bite, which are all printmaking terms. And they've got a lot of weight and grit to them, and he refers to kind of printmaking as a battle, which I totally relate to. When you start and commit to making a plate, it is a battle. There's always this push and pull between the metal and the acids, and maybe going a step too far, taking it back, adding it in. And his plates tell that history of the making, which really inspire me. So as Jess was saying, I was awarded a Quest scholarship in 2018 to undertake this printmaking fellowship opportunity that Jason had awarded me. So the fellowship was for 2 years working alongside Jason in the print room, learning like his process inside out to really advance my understanding of intaglio methods. For those of you who don't know about Quest, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background of the charity. It's an amazing charity to be a part of, because they don't just give you money and, you know, say go and get on with your life. You're part of this family of makers. So they support excellence in British craftsmanship through scholarship and apprenticeship funding. They strive to make a difference to the lives and careers of talented, inspiring makers working across the UK. They define craft broadly and are excited to support contemporary innovations as well as traditional craft skills. So when I applied, I did not think that they would take on a printmaker, because their past scholars have been very traditional makers. But to my delight, they did offer me an award and allowed me to train alongside Jason, and also got to meet Norman Ackroyd, which is very exciting. So on the fellowship, I had to propose a body of work that I would make whilst at the City and Guilds. And because I started getting interested into our history and the, you know, architectural kind of remnants of these kind of bygone eras, I proposed to make a body of work that documented industrial decline in Wales. I'd previously been and explored a few abandoned places and realised that there was actually a lot of them to be documenting, realising actually I've set myself this lifetime project of recording hundreds of abandoned buildings around the UK and like the Southwest Wales. So this building is off an old copper mine it's just outside Swansea on the way to Brecon Beacons. And again, it's this huge building that has been left to fall completely into disrepair. And there's not much evidence of our industrial heritage left in Wales, because they have all just been completely bulldozed and, you know, just kind of eradicated from the landscape. So the ones that are remaining is like going back in time, which is, you know, for me, it's interesting to kind of go into these spaces. Again, the one on the left hand side is from Coke Works, and the one on the right hand side is off an old coal works in just outside Pontypool. Again, these spaces, they do have this monumental feel to them. And there's so much going on, there's so much texture, there's so much structural work. It's a bit overwhelming when you first get into a place like this. And I go armed with a sketchbook, and if I'm in a place officially, probably shouldn't say this on camera, then I can sit and I can draw and I can really kind of focus on what it is I would like to kind of capture in that place. If it's more of a snap and go situation, then I'll take millions of photos and I'll come back to the studio and I'll kind of go through them all and then make a series of sketches, which I'll either turn into lithographs or etchings. So just a few more images of the places that I've come to find. And what I love about these places is that there's a real kind of complex fight between nature and the architecture and the building. You've got these harsh lines, but then you've got the softness of the foliage coming in through the window. So for 2 years, I spent time at the City and Guilds. This is a few of the printmaking fellows and the tutors and the studio. It's a really sweet kind of independent art school in South London. There's not many independent schools left in the UK, so it was a really unique place. And I felt really fortunate to, you know, have the opportunity to go there every week and make work. Sadly, it got cut short because of COVID. And this is some of the etchings that I made in response to my explorations of abandoned buildings in Wales. At this time, I'd really start to play around with light. So looking at, how the light can lead you into a piece, and how I can add. So in these buildings I visited when it was absolutely pouring with rain, so there was a lot of atmosphere, there was puddles, there was reflections, and that all adds to the atmosphere and the kind of to try and put that forward into the etching. These are off the Coke works, and I started to become obsessed with getting the blackest of blacks. You might recognize this building. This is from Bristol, and it's the old post office by Temple Meads, Parcel Force, I think it used to be. And a friend texted me saying, like, they're bulldozing the Parcel Force. So I quickly went down there with my sketchbook, did a load of drawings, and then made an etching, which now there's, that building does not exist anymore. So another thing that really progressed my kind of printmaking, I'm guessing career, was being awarded an Elizabeth Greenshield grant back in 2019. And this allowed me to set up my own studio at State of the Arts, and also buy my first press, which has just been life-changing. So I've got a polymetal JW80 press, so it's 80 meters wide and 160 long, meaning that I had freedom to just to print whenever I liked. But so before I was kind of using UE, I was using Spike, I was using the City and Guilds, which is all lovely working in a community kind of print shop, but you have to continuously, get your stuff out, put your stuff away, go home, and there's a barrier to that. So this allowed me just complete freedom and independence to make whenever I like. So, I could go 7 days a week for however many hours I was able to go. So this is my old studio. And I also managed to save this little LIFO press from the City and Guilds basement that had been left to rot for about 15 years. So I brought it back to Bristol. It was covered in rust, cleaned it up. And now I can print stones in my studio too, which is, a great opportunity. And I feel privileged to have that little press with me. So when I got my own studio, I was invited to take part in a project in Birmingham called the Townscape Heritage Project. And I was commissioned to make a series of work that documented the fading heritage of the Jewellery Quarter. So I was allowed into 2 buildings, Alabaster and Wilson and Unity Works, that both used to be high-end jewellers. And basically was just given the keys and be like, yeah, go in and see you later. So I got to spend the day just drawing, photographing, really getting a feel for these places. And then I came back to my studio and I started making these huge monoprints, and started making them on silk. So the picture on the right-hand side, the silk is 3 meters by 1 meter wide. I had to hire Spike Print Studios press to print them on, and they're made up of 5 panels. And I'd never printed on silk before, and it was really interesting how the ink laid onto the fabric and the way that you could get light through the material really kind of resonated with that transience of the building itself. And I made some really big etchings of the buildings inside, so this one is, what is that, 160 by 80 centimeters. And these, I wanted to make something quite powerful because the exhibition space that they were being shown in was a huge building and small etchings would have just got lost. So I was like, right, I need to go big. So I've keep going bigger, and it's really hard now to go back to working small scale, which, then they just take a bit longer. So these took me about 4 months to make. And again, it was a real battle between making the plates, putting them in the acid, taking them out, putting them back in. So the plates go in and out of the acid maybe up to 10 times, which in between each time I've put a ground on, I've drawn through the ground, I've put it in acid, I've etched it, I've proofed it, and I keep doing that until I eventually feel happy with how the piece is looking. And these are 2 more etchings from that series. And what I loved about these buildings was that they were designed specifically for jewellers in mind. So the windows were ginormous to let in the optimum light so the jewellers could see really well, and when they come to set the stones into the rings or whatever they were kind of making at the time. And this is just an image of the exhibition space and another monoprint that I made. So this kind of takes me on to the last year. So I made that work at the beginning of last year. And then COVID hit in March, and I was quite relieved in a way, because I had a really hectic schedule going backwards and forwards to London, working at UE, making this work for the Jewelry Quarter, doing talks, teaching. And it gave me a chance to pause. And in February, I was approached by WWF, kind of asked if I'd be interested in making work that raised awareness of deforestation. And at the time, I did not have the headspace to even kind of think about taking on a project. But when I had that chance to kind of really assess what I was doing, realizing the importance and actually researching what's happening globally with climate change and the impact that we are having on our natural world, I decided to actually start thinking about how I could work with WWF. So over the last 10 months, I've been working on a series of prints that will aim to raise awareness of deforestation. So I've been working with a screen printer in Glasgow, and together we are creating a set of interactive prints that in the daytime, there'll be the celebration of the rainforest, but at night, all these threats and kind of the biodiversity, that's the loss of biodiversity that's happening, will come to light through glow in the dark pigment, which the process is absolutely bonkers, but they look quite cool when they're done. So I've been doing a lot of lithography for this project, making a lot of plates and doing some etching. So this is an etching which is available actually now on my website. It's the first one that's been kind of released, and 20% of the sales go back to WWF for the emergency wildfire campaign. And this is kind of a little sneaky peek of how the prints glow in the dark. We're quite close to finishing the first print in the series, which will be released with WWF in a few months' time. We're also making a short film about the process and about the Amazon rainforest and positive changes that can be made. So looking forward to sharing that soon with you all. Then this leads me on to Bristol Print Atelier, which I set up in 2020, well, last October, with two of the printmakers, Virginia Bridge and Theodora Ballantyne Way. So this is a short video just to show you inside the studio. We were all working in our own individual studios. So I was at Estate of the Arts, and so was Theodora, and Virginia was working in her basement at home. And we just had a conversation. Like, I was starting to expand. I didn't really have enough space in my small studio to kind of to work larger scale. And I'd also started teaching in my studio space, but could only really get 4 people in there, and it was a bit cramped. So we had this kind of conversation about coming together and setting up a studio space. So we spent maybe 2 months looking at different locations around Bristol, and we've settled on a space. Well, we're in a space now in South Bristol, which is about 5 minutes from Parsons Street Station, and it's nestled in an industrial estate. It says 1,800 square feet, and it's set up for intaglio and lithographic processes. So although the studio is mainly for our own use, to expand our own ways of working and to work bigger, we will also start teaching from the studio, which we were supposed to start teaching last week, but obviously because of the latest lockdowns, we have moved those to March, and we're really hopeful that can continue in March and doesn't have to be postponed any longer. We'll also start doing an open access session 1 day a week. So to work with people to advance their own kind of practice within intaglio. We all have a teaching background and have a passion for kind of sharing our process and skills with people. So that's the studio. So this year I've also still continued to document kind of heritage buildings that I've come to find, and this year I found this amazing mill in Taunton, which used to be called Tonedale Mill, and it was made for textiles. And it was it was an amazing space to visit because it just kept giving and giving. Every door led to a new space that had machinery that was absolutely covered with ivy and, you know, natural kind of forms, almost just taking back the space. And there's something really lovely about seeing this kind of visual, knowing that if we continue just to absolutely screw the planet over, Mother Nature will still live on, it, you know, regardless if we're here or not. I think I read somewhere that it would take 500 years for there to be no human evidence left on the earth, and for nature just to reclaim it back. I kind of get a bit of comfort in that. So this is another picture from that mill, and you can see like nature is just everywhere. It doesn't take long for ivy and plants or trees to start growing in a space. And again, it's that kind of conflict between nature and the structures of the building, and they become memorials of conflicts of like economic loss and social kind of decline as well. I also love the bizarre objects that I find in these places. So, you know, I haven't positioned this, but it's like a weird cat and a saucepan. And narratives start coming into your head, like who does this cat belong to? Why is there a saucepan? And then the drum kit, you know, there's a drum kit in this space. Somebody obviously left that there and used to go there and practice, but who was that? Why? And that's the nice thing about these abandoned buildings, is that they become joint playgrounds for people. And so I've continued to make etching over the last year, and really focusing on the light and the dark within these prints, and kind of etching them to a point where they are really deep. So the lines have been etched for 8 hours, meaning that there's a real kind of proud line of ink on the surface of the paper, almost becoming like a braille kind of piece. And really kind of understanding the process a lot more to have high definition in the printmaking process. And this is a recent place, it's called Verne Works, which is in just outside of oh my god, what's the town called? Somewhere in Wales. Sorry, can't remember the place where it's near. Again, this huge building that they used to make Concorde wings in, and now it's just derelict. But there's so much in there, like the graffiti, and you could tell there's been a lot of raves in that place by NOS canisters and, you know, balloons and all sorts of bottles being left behind. And this was the last place I visited. I went here in September, and it's this old mill in just outside of Aberystwyth in Wales. So Wales has a lot of beautiful kind of abandoned places just hidden in forests. So this old textile mill was just kind of tucked away along a river, and we had to do a bit of rambling to get down there. But when you're in this space, like all of the wall was still left there, kind of pristine. It'd been preserved over time, and no one had really gone in and touched them. Really interesting spaces. And the machinery as well, that's just left to rust. And I'm sure, you know, people, I don't know, they almost like deserve to be in a museum so that they're not forgotten and kind of left to rot even further. And then I've started making kind of bigger pieces, multi-panel pieces that make up one image, using a lot of different materials to mark make. So I've started using a lot of lithography crayons within the etching process to get more of a hand-drawn mark within the prints that I'm making. And again, a lot of different stop-out tools. So I've been using real chunky Sharpies to act as a resist to the acid, just to kind of make them feel a bit more expressive, and for them not to be replicas of a location or a place, but to be records of my own kind of journey into that location, kind of seeing it through an artist's lens. And more recently, kind of making them quite dark, and the light coming through the windows, and again, in reflections of water. And recently I haven't been able to get to any new locations to make work from, and I've been doing lots of lovely walking around Bristol. So I've actually started making nice tree etchings, which has been quite refreshing, doing something different than the urban landscape. And I just keep telling myself that that's okay. Like, you don't have to be known for one kind of, yeah, like landscape or derelict buildings. And this is the last thing I found, and I just wanted to put a positive message out there during these hard times. Yeah, don't forget to love yourself. I think that comes to the end of my slideshow. How do I stop sharing this screen? Go back in.
At the top, is it?
Oh yeah, there you go. Cool.
Thanks, Jemma. That was amazing. It's really interesting to hear, like, your different processes and the way that you have kind of developed over quite a short. It sounds like you work quite intensively, and you know, really, it's kind of refreshing to hear such focus. I think. Before I open it out to everybody for questions, I just wanted to ask you a little bit, to expand a little bit more on how you, if you can, on how you access these places and how you find them, because obviously sounds like some of them you have to be a little bit secretive about getting.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of forums online. One's called 28 Days Later, and they're quite geeky and nerdy. It's just like people who love, they're called urbex, or urban exploration sites. And people will kind of discover these locations and they'll write a report and they'll put them online. They don't ever say how they access it. So I tend to, if I'm going somewhere, I'll be like, oh, is there any sites? So I was kind of, you know, if I'm going with a friend, I don't know, to, I don't know, let's say Devon, I'm like, oh, I'll just see if there's any abandoned buildings in Devon. You can kind of search these sites and there always is somewhere to kind of look at. So I always go knowing that I might not be able to get in. You know, often or not, there are kind of ways in where other people have gained access. So it'd be like, I accidentally slipped under the fence because there's a hole in there, do you know? But then more recently, I have been writing to developers to see if I can gain access. Most of them they don't respond, but a few times I have, you know, been invited into a space to start documenting it. I'm also working with an architect who specializes in historic buildings. I don't know if he's actually listening in or not, but together we've started mapping places in around the southwest and in Wales. So yeah, just by like word of mouth, and people tend to just email me saying, hi Jemma, I've seen your work. Do you know about this iron ore mill? Or do you know about this coal mine? Or do you know about this slate mine? Do you know about this? And I'm like, oh no. So, you know, I've got a whole list of places that I want to try and explore after lockdown, and to start making work about.
Brilliant. Thank you. Would anyone else like to ask a question? You can just kind of wave your arms around wildly or put it in the chat. Oh, Ian? Ian and then Kath. Oh, Ian, you're on mute.
Right, so I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah.
I noticed in your most recent work, you've been starting to experiment with slight colour tints.
Yes.
Is that something you think you might develop further, or was something you just did?
Originally I did it because it was a really grey day. I was like, I'm going to bring a bit of colour into the studio, and yeah, I started doing some really random colour blends, which I quite enjoy making. And I've started using, I started using colour. I've started putting sepia in my black ink to give it a bit more of a warmer tone. So I do kind of play around with colour in that sense. But actually, John Virtue had a really nice saying. He said that he sees color as an unnecessary distraction, which I guess is quite true in some sense. Like if I would start whacking in reds into a ruined building, it wouldn't make any sense. So I think it needs, if I would start using color, it would have to almost makes sense to why I was using it. And I think the one you're referring to might be the tree scene.
Yes, there was some fencing with a lovely sort of brown, almost a sunsetty kind of effect in the background.
Yeah.
That's what I was referring to specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, which made sense on that scene, because when I was there drawing, it was, you know, at sunset, so it was quite nice, yeah, just using a bit of color in the studio.
So maybe where the emphasis is more on nature, that would fit more, but obviously your industrial scenes are meant to be quite
a bit like raw.
It's not bleak. I think maybe that's the wrong word, but yeah.
Yeah, I think they are. I think the black and white does suit abandoned buildings or that kind of industrial sense, because, like you said, there is a bleakness to them, but there is beauty within that kind of decay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Kath, did you want to ask something?
I did, yes. I just wondered how important it is for you to see these buildings with your own eyes, whether you'd ever consider doing a print from photographs somebody had taken some time ago of a building that no longer exists.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I do get sent images, and I don't work from other people's photographs. I have to physically have explored that place myself. Otherwise, yeah, like when you go to a place, you get that real, like, kind of heightened sense of atmosphere and emotion response to the location, which you wouldn't necessarily get working from a photograph. And I've actually found it really hard working on the WWF project, making work about the Amazon rainforest, because I've never been. But then I did find the living rainforest, which is a place near in Berkshire. So I spent a morning in the living rainforest, you know, the closest I'm going to ever get to exploring the Amazon rainforest. So for me, it's really important to, yeah, explore a location, and you get to come across, you know, like, I would kind of capture a place different to a photographer, because I'm interested in different, like, forms, textures, light. So yeah, it has to be a place that I've been to.
Right, thank you.
Does anyone else have a question that they wanted to put to Jemma? Joe?
Yes, at the beginning, you described yourself as a painter, printmaker. I wondered if you ever have any time to actually do any painting. Does it differ much from the prints that you make?
Yeah, I suppose in a way I do still paint, because in my etchings I use a lot of sugar lift, which I use with paintbrushes, so I'm painting on the tones almost like watercolor. And if I ever go into the landscape or out in, like, so I always carry a sketchbook with me, and like a little pot of like a watercolor set, and sometimes I just do watercolors, but yeah, I do quite miss painting on a big scale, but then I can't do it all. I wish I had more hours, or I didn't have to sleep. It'd be really good.
Well, I discovered John Virtue as well, coincidentally.
Oh, where did you
come from black and white photography background into painting? So I did a lot of large monochrome stuff. But so he used shellac.
Yes,
so
he did.
Had white paint, black ink, and then shellac gave him a warm
tone,
if you like, you know.
Yeah, his work is probably, well, it's down to his seeing those monoprints that kind of dragged me into the print studio. I think if I hadn't have seen them, I don't know whether I would have kind of gravitated more towards that, kind of those processes in my degree. Yeah, it's funny how one artist can have a big impact on your creative kind of career.
I wanted to go large. But I lost access to the studio space. So you're somewhere near Knoll West, are you? You're where you are now?
Far from Knoll West, yeah. We're probably, do you know Hartcliffe Way? Yeah, so we're on Hartcliffe Way. There's an Esso garage, and we're kind of behind there.
Right.
Yeah, so it's like 5-minute walk from Parsons Street train station, or the number 75 or 76 stops outside.
And I assume you filled it up, have you? You haven't got any spare meterage?
No, we thought it was an absolute huge space when we moved in, and we all started moving our stuff in. And so Virginia also has the same press as I do, and they just take up so much space. And you're like, okay. And we're getting a big lithography press delivered in a couple of weeks' time, so we can start doing big stones. So we don't have any space for people to kind of have a studio space here, but we are going to start doing open access 1 day a week, so that people can come in and, you know, practice on big stones or make big etchings. We've got a nice size acid bath to my right here. So yeah, we're going to be welcoming people soon. It's just a matter of when COVID eases off a bit.
Okay, thanks.
Jemma, I've got a question in the chat from Richard. Have you ever considered exploring rapidly disappearing psychiatric hospitals? The south of Bristol was Barrow Gurney Hospital, and he explored it several years ago. So he lived in the grounds as a child.
Wow. Sadly, I have thought about psychiatric hospitals. Barrow Gurney now does not exist, sadly. That's been and gone. There is a place in Wales which I'm waiting to go to in Talgarth. I think it's Talgarth. A huge site, which looks really interesting, and that kind of historical side of sorry, I'm getting distracted by reading the chat as well. But there's so many abandoned places, it's hard to kind of focus, and that's why I've kind of focused on the heritage side of it, because they are the ones that are being lost quite quickly, repurposed or redeveloped, and that kind of heritage side of it gets lost. So it's kind of recording that before it's completely gone.
Alice?
Me? Can I speak? Hi, Jemma. Thank you so much. Great work, amazing.
Thank you.
I just want to go back at the beginning of your talk. You talked about your time doing research. Was it at the council or something? You mentioned it.
Yeah, it was the Bristol Record Office.
Record Office, yeah. Can you just so you said you had a residency there. Did you kind of appoint yourself the residency, or how did you go about that period of time?
So I contacted them and just said, hi, you know, I was studying an MA and I was doing research into Bristol's history in some of the buildings and interested in our heritage. So they basically, I could go in and just ask, well, anyone could go in and ask for information, but I had one of the contact who would then kind of go through the stuff I was researching and kind of just tell me a bit more about the history of what I was looking at. So I looked at some really beautiful like blueprints of the planning of the old jail, and would kind of describe the maps to me, which was really like a real kind of like lovely opportunity to get. And then I had an exhibition in that space, so the work that I was making then went into a display. So it was the work that I was making, sketchbook work, a bit of history about that area in Bristol, and it's an amazing archive if you ever get to go. And they normally open you know, the Bristol Open Doors weekend in September. You can normally book a tour to go behind the scenes, and they've got 3 floors of archives just on Bristol. It's pretty extraordinary, like ledgers of you know, when it was a real industrial city and there was ships going in and out. They've got ledgers of you know, you know, there's pages in there that describe, you know, people being exchanged for sugar and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty, you know, Bristol's got quite a grim history, but like a lot of major cities. But yeah, they're really lovely people. So if you have a project in mind, it's always worth kind of dropping them an email.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Can help. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Just one. I can imagine setting up a brand new location for your printmaking must have been a bit of a challenge in some ways during COVID. Were there any particular challenges you had to face and overcome?
Yeah, like
had an unlocked and locked again, and
yeah, there's been challenges like we were hoping to obviously start open access and teaching this time round, meaning, you know, we're just having, it's, you know, the rent between 3 of us is quite expensive. So that's been a bit of a challenge, but then we're just kind of, in a way, it pushes you then to try and find other sources of income. So doing talks for universities and stuff like that. But yeah, the main challenge was actually trying to organize the space and getting it and like getting our presses moved during COVID. You know, I had to be out of my studio, and then there was then like, oh, we don't think we can come and move your press. You're like, no, I have to. Like, I can't just take it home with me. My housemates would not have liked that. But yeah, it's good, but there's also those obviously worries about the future. But yeah, hopefully it will all be okay.
Jemma, can I ask a question about like the sustainability aspect of printmaking and particularly etching? Like, like the processes, are they
so
pressure to kind of use more environmental inks and processes?
Yeah, so I mean, I use everything local. So the inks that I use are made in Wales. The paper I use is made in Somerset, so they're not, you know, flying hundreds of miles from around the world. I've just started looking into using old boilers as copper plates. So you can get them from a scrapyard for 60 quid. I'm just waiting for UE to open up so that I can use the metal center to actually cut them and plane them into actual sheets. With my etching plates, I will often use the back of them so that they are actually getting repurposed. The best is stone lithography, because you buy a stone and you can get hundreds and hundreds of prints from it. You just regrain it every time. So I'm at the moment kind of doing quite a lot of lithography work as well. And when I do a plate lithography, I would then use the back of that as a dry point plate or cut them up for workshops. So I do try and recycle, and I'm looking at metals that I can get from scrap yards. It is constantly on my mind. The impact that the work I'm making, you kind of got to balance it up, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. If nobody else has any other questions, can't see any hands waving. Thank you, Jemma, for sharing your practice with us. That was really brilliant. And if you know anyone that wanted to come today but couldn't make it, we will be putting the recorded talk up on our website and sharing it on social media in the next few days. As I said, we will be taking a break from these talks on Wednesdays for a few weeks at least, but we'll be relaunching hopefully again in the next couple of months with a full programme of activity. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you for listening.